Hi, and we're coming to you from a First Liberty event. I'm Stuart Shepard, host of First Liberty Live. I've got with me Dr. John Yoo. He is a professor at the University of California at Berkeley in the law school. We're going to have to talk to you about that along the way. He also, along the way, clerked for Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice, and served in the Justice Department in the Bush administration. And you also now have a Texas connection?
Yes, in fact, I've just decided to join the University of Texas at Austin, which is starting a new school. It's called the School of Civic Leadership. One of its founding principles, one of its founding missions is to teach the framing of our Constitution. And the dean, Justin Dyer, is an expert on the relationship between religion and the Constitution. And he believes that the Constitution should be understood within a Judeo-Christian framework. So quite, sympathetic to what you're doing here at First Liberty.
I know you could probably give me a 50-minute lecture on it, but in a few sentences explain the argument that the Constitution should be understood in that light. What is it about it that suggests that it is a Judeo-Christian based document?
There are a number of ways to do that. One is, what do the phrases free exercise of religion and not establishing a church mean in a society that was where everybody who was here at the founding was Christian? How would they have understood it? Also, I think the Constitution relies on religion to build the morals of society. It doesn't rely on the government to do it for us. It expects that all of us will have this private sphere of life. And back then, religion was maybe the most important occupant of that sphere, and they were responsible for our families, for our morals, not the government.
I hear from a lot of people, they're generally trolls on social media, you know what that's like, and they always say, hey, there's nothing in the Constitution that mentions Christianity at all, so what are you talking about?
Yeah, that's why it's important to understand the Constitution in the context of the history of when it was founded. And I think the most important thing is that unlike Europe, unlike Asia, we as Americans don't expect the government to fix every problem. We don't rely on it to tell us what to do or what to think. It relies on us to do it. And the second point I was going to make, maybe tonight in my speech, is that America is exceptional. We are far more religious than all the other countries in the world of our size, of our economies and politics. And that makes America exceptional. Our Constitution protects that exceptionalism of our country.
I will confess I'm a big fan of Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice. You clerked with him early in your career. Describe for me what it's like working for him. What's he like in real life?
So first, I got to clerk for him, I think, his third year on the court. So he was only 45 years old, much younger than I am now. He already achieved so much. But he is, I think, the most normal human being on the Supreme Court. A lot of them are very strange people. He's a guy who, he likes to drive his car, watch TV, have a good meal. He's not
camps out in an RV.
I went with him on one such trip, which was amazing because it was the first and probably the last time I'll ever want to get on an RV. But we drove from Florida all the way to Washington, D.C. in his RV by ourselves. And he's a wonderful guy. The best time he has is we pull off, go to a truck stop or a fast food place and sit there, have a meal and talk to the people around who had no idea who he was. That was great because he wants to connect with people on, everyday basis. He doesn't want anyone to think he's just, sometimes it's very funny. They would ask him, what do you do? He goes, I'm a lawyer. Where? Oh, I'm a lawyer in Washington. I work for the federal government. That's what he tells people.
That's funny. That is very funny. First Liberty, all we do is religious freedom cases. That's exclusively our entire thing. Clarence Thomas, early in his career, started talking about this as an issue. Describe for me what he saw coming down the road that many other people did not.
Well, first he was, and this is not just in religion, but lots of areas, he was the kind of guy who would say, the emperor has no clothes. How is it that we've allowed constitutional law to deviate so far from what our founders wanted? And so he's always a person who says, I don't care what precedent says. I don't care what all the fancy law schools say or lawyers. This seems to me the right answer. So of all the justices, he's the one who say, this is the right answer. I'm putting aside all the pressures of society to think different. So I admire him for that greatly. The second thing is he's one of the people who very early on said that this barrier between church and state, right, the wall of separation, is not in the Constitution. That's something Thomas Jefferson came up years after the Constitution. Believe it or not, Jefferson's not a founder. He was, he was having a good time in Paris while everyone was doing the hard work of writing the Constitution and getting it ratified. In fact, Jefferson was very skeptical of the Constitution. Thomas made the point, this wall of separation is not actually required by the First Amendment. He started writing early on in his years at the court when people violently disagreed with him. The idea that you can have religion in public life, where the job of the government is not to shut religion out. The government just can't play favorites between religions, but the government can support religion generally, like important cases like recognizing the right of postal workers, for example, case you'd be very familiar with this, right?
Yeah.
Right of postal workers to choose not to work on the Sabbath if that's their deeply held religious belief, or to participate in public programs just like everyone else can and other groups can. He started writing about that in the early 90s, all by himself. Now, I think he can have the satisfaction, 30 years later, that has become the law of the land.
I've been reading your book that just came out last year called The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Supreme Court. It's really good. I like it because I'm not an attorney, and it's
good for you. I'm so glad to hear that.
But it's a good primer
Yes.
on the Supreme Court, going all the way back to the beginning and explaining the foundations that set up what's happening now. Let's talk about your view of the court. When you look at the current balance of the court in the arc of history, where are we at this point in time?
So one way you can understand the court, and thanks for reading the book, and the book really is for people who are not lawyers, so I'm glad you read it. You're the target audience, is that the court over time, particularly after the New Deal, grew its power, but in a way it was holding hands with the vast expansion of our government.
Yeah.
That's so at odds with what our founders wanted. As I said, the founders wanted a small, minimal government, protect our rights, but in general, leave people alone, right, to live their lives as they chose. The court basically blessed this vast expansion of the federal government to the point where it intrudes in our lives all the time, every day. This court, I think the way to understand it is that it is trying to rebalance things, to restore something of the original Constitution, to push back against the vast powers of our federal bureaucracy, the great claims of Congress and these agencies to micromanage our lives. And that's especially true in religion, right? I think this court would, you can see it in the opinions, I think it's going to become an even stronger theme in the next few years. The government should leave religious groups alone. They shouldn't try to cram down people's throats a woke ideology or a belief on certain things to believe about gender and so on. People should be allowed to exercise their religions, run their businesses, run their schools the way they want.
Over the last 2 or 3 years, there's been a lot of criticism of the court that they are undoing a lot of major decisions of the past, from the Dobbs decision to the Smith decision to, you can just go down the list. You know them way better than I do. The complaint is that they're undoing democracy. They're acting in an unconstitutional manner. But that's exactly the opposite of what's happening from what I'm hearing from you.
I would say so. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned abortion, the Dobbs case. People of different religions in good faith can have different points of view about abortion. What the court in Dobbs did was say, we, the Supreme Court, aren't going to tell the whole country what to do anymore. We're going to actually return it to the democratic process. Let each state decide what its position on abortion is going to be.
Which is the constitutional position.
Yes, that is the original constitutional position. And think about all these important questions of life and death, the death penalty, euthanasia. We leave all those to the states too, because that was the original founders' design, that the federal government wasn't going to seize the power over these fundamental questions and impose the answer on all of us. And so if you look at Dobbs in particular, that's what the court's doing. I think that's also, if you look at the religion decisions, that's also what the court's doing. The federal government is not going to try to intervene and bar religious groups from participating on an equal plane with non-religious groups. Let the states run programs where they make these resources available to religious groups. So I think actually these claims, and this is typical though, these claims by people who want to micromanage again our private lives, they're the ones constantly complaining that their opponents are against democracy, where actually they are using this unelected bureaucracy to impose policies on all of us. That's the undemocratic government.
Most of us have an understanding of religious freedom in public life that even if we don't know about the case that brought about the test that most of the decisions we've seen over 50 years have come from, it's Lemon v. Kurtzman.
Lemon test.
And it's built into us now to assume that that's the way things are. But the court, in our Kennedy versus Bremerton, it's the praying coach on the 50-yard line, Joe Kennedy, great guy. They said, we're done with that test. They have changed how the courts are going to look at religious cases. Now it's something called history and tradition.
Yes.
Give us your understanding of how that test would be applied. How would that work?
So first, it's a good thing that the court got rid of the Lemon test. So many justices over so many years said that test makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so it was time for it to die. In fact, Justice Scalia had a great line that he compared to something like a vampire. It's supposed to be dead.
A late-night duel.
Yeah, it would arise
Yeah.
from the crypt when everyone thought it was gone. But I do think finally, the stake has been plunged into the Lemon test. So good question. What's going to replace it? Of course, we're still looking to see. And, First Liberty is going to be one of those groups that's going to be importantly involved in shaping what will replace the Lemon test. How will the court think about it? But I think the most important approach, I think that unifies the court, the majority on the court, is look at the original understanding of not just the free exercise and establishment clauses in 1791 when they were wrapped, but also look at how they were applied to the states through the 14th Amendment in 1868. And I think you will find that at those two important periods, this idea of driving out religion from public life would have horrified those founders in both periods. I mean, of course, our founding fathers, many of them were religious dissenters from Europe, from Great Britain. But also think about 1868, at the end of a terrible civil war, that I think for the good of the country, we ended slavery. The abolitionist movement was a religious movement. Mm-hmm. So the idea that you would pass a 14th Amendment that said then drive religion out of public life would have made no sense, right, I think, to the abolitionists and the radical Republicans of Reconstruction. So I think that's what you'll see. Then you'll see, I think, the court looking, is there anything in our history and tradition that contradicts that essential principle of religious liberty and freedom? I think they will see a lot of the things we see as hostile to religion now are just recent inventions, so things that have happened since like the 1950s and 60s. But when you look at the long scope of our constitutional history, they're outliers. And then again, as I said, this court, I think, is interested in restoring the original founding principles and recalling us to those roots rather than trying to impose this kind of progressive bureaucratic government on us.
When I was reading through your bio, I see clerked for Clarence Thomas, conservative, arguably the most conservative member of the court currently. Scalia used to compete with him on that, but that's another story.
I'd be worried if there was someone outflanking him. I'm like, how conservative would be someone who's more conservative than Clarence Thomas?
And then you worked in the Bush administration,
I did.
Conservative, and now you're a professor at Berkeley Law. Mm-hmm. Not conservative, not even close.
Not even close.
What's your advice for young law students, or who I'm thinking of in particular, but basically anyone who's conservative, trying to function at a high level in a world that often is very secular, very liberal? You've clearly done it. What's the path?
Interesting question. I haven't thought about it a lot. Yeah. First of all, I think the idea that there's going to be any conservative university to go to it's a nice idea, but it's a mirage. All the top universities are liberal. Even schools we think of as conservative, they might have 30% of the faculty being conservative. That's seen as a conservative university. There really aren't any. The one good thing about law school, though, and I think it's different than what's the terrible things that are going on in, say, the arts and social sciences, mm-hmm, is that there's two sides to every case. All right? Even though everyone may disagree with somebody, that person still has a right to a lawyer, has a right to make their case. And so in law school, I think you're a conservative student or a liberal student, that is your saving grace, is that you have the legal system believes we have a duty to present both sides of every dispute fully and fairly. And that's where I think conservative students can find their home, is even though they might be unpopular, they are part of the legal system just as much as people who are on the side of this progressive government majority, which I think dominates the legal academy in many of our universities.
It's my impression that many students hide their political leanings when they're in school because they're afraid it might impact their entire career, an entire lifetime of work.
I would tell students not to do that. I think actually And the advice I've received from the people who came before me, like Justice Thomas, like the other judge I clerked for, Larry Silverman, like the people I worked in the Bush administration with, they all said, that you will be unhappy. The better thing to do is stand up for what you believe in. That's the real way to navigate this. Because
Don't be a jerk about it.
no, just say what you believe. Yeah, you don't have to be a jerk about it, but we have jerks on our side, just like the other side does too. No, but I think that it's just you can't manage all the other things. This is actually a very important piece of advice I received from Justice Thomas. Actually, he said, you can't control and manage what everyone else is going to think about you or say about you. The only thing you can control is what you believe. And so why would you alter what you believe based on all these other people and what they think that you can't control? That's just public opinion or opinion. So all you can do is say what you think. That's the only thing that the government can't take away from you or society can't take away from you, is the freedom to believe what you believe.
Dr. John Yoo, great chatting with you. Lots of great insights in there. Appreciate the fact that you're here.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me. This has been a wonderful conference. I'm really lucky to be here.